the consumer who would repay the money through this platform. The identity of all parties, that would be verified, all transactions would be recorded, and this would actually cut down on the opportunities for theft, money laundering and even fraud. So the company's chief executive says the power dollar, it's been established within the scope of current laws. They've been cooperating with the Reserve Bank, with the Inland Revenue Department, and although it's not an officially a digital currency, they reckon it's well on the way. And I think we can just take this as just another exciting example of some more developments we're seeing coming out of that financial tech sector, which is really challenging the stranglehold that banks have had on the financial services that are often offered out there to consumers.
And how have the markets been looking today?
Well, our NZX Top 50 is up by 77 points to 11,975. Our own dollar is at 66.4 US cents, 92.5 Australian, 51.2 British pence, and gold is down $1.60 to 1,911 US dollars an ounce.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton there with Business News. Now, here's a hot tip. If you want to know who will win this year's election, you could do worse than ask the residents of Birkdale, a suburb on Auckland's North Shore. For at least 4 elections in a row, Birkenhead Baptist Church has been one of the most accurate polling booths in the country. RNZ data journalist Kate Newton asked, why is that? And who is the community backing this election?
Pastor Rob Markley is the first to admit that Birkenhead Baptist Church doesn't look like much from the outside or the inside.
In all honesty, we're a bit dated and shabby. The furniture's a bit run down and the carpet's worn out. And so it's nothing very exciting.
But the modernist brick church on Birkdale Road on Auckland's North Shore plays host to something like a democratic miracle each election. There are roughly 2,500 polling booths across the country, but Birkenhead Baptist is one of just 8 places that aligned almost exactly with the nationwide party vote in 2017, 2014 and 2011. It's the only one of those that also got it right in 2008. The whole thing still has Mr. Markley scratching his head.
I feel like there's some spiritual reason for it, why the answer will be there, and I don't know what that would be.
The surrounding suburb of Birkdale is home to people from a jumble of incomes and backgrounds, and plenty of them come to Kathy Marvea's salon opposite the church to get their hair done and have a yarn.
There's a huge variety of people, from lawyers to, cleaners. They all come in the salon, and it's really, really cool, actually. And so you get everybody's different opinions, which is all of New Zealand, I guess. Yeah, they're a bit careful, though, because it can get pretty heated.
Ms Marvea says the COVID-19 response is the issue on most people's minds, and opinion varies about whether the current government can solve the looming economic crisis. But she says as far as she can tell, there is consensus on one topic.
Heaps of people want to vote for to legalise cannabis. Every type of person you could think of has been saying that they want to vote for that, for the referendum.
David Farrer, who carries out political polling for the National Party, says the idea of bellwether polling booths or electorates is nothing new in New Zealand.
In the past, the 2 Hamilton seats used to be the ones that people talked about, where Hamilton goes, the country goes, and that was certainly quite correct for many years. It did change in 2005, national one. I think it was Hamilton East before they came into government, and they've kept the Hamilton seats despite having lost government now.
Mr Farrer thought an area that reflects New Zealand's overall demographics might be a good indicator, but RNZ found the most accurate polling booths were actually in areas that had slightly higher proportions of Pākehā and Asian residents. Auckland University political researcher Lara Greaves was ready with an explanation.
Pacifica particularly, but Māori too, are like multiple times more likely to vote for Labour than they are National. They're less likely to suddenly swing to National when there's a popular leader, so they just overrepresent Labour voters wherever you have Māori and Pacifica.
The Birkdale area might be accurate now, but whether it will stay that way may depend on whether there are any big shifts in the population there. Rob Markley doesn't think there have been many changes since he arrived a decade ago, but says there's a trickle of upwardly mobile first home buyers into the area. Daniel Martenga is one of those new residents, moving into a bungalow on Birkdale Road at the start of this year. He voted for Labour in 2017, partly because of their housing policies, and is leaning that way again this election.
I personally would actually be better off myself if I actually swung towards National, given my sort of income band, plus I'm a homeowner. But I think for me, it's we are only in this position because of what's happened previously. It would be really unfair for me to now go, I've got what I've needed from it, so now I'm going to, change my voting.
He'll have his say at the church on the 17th of October, along with about 1,000 other Birkdale voters. And later that day, when the results trickle in, they'll find out whether their polling booth has kept its status as a weather vane for the nation. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Kate Newton, tēnei.
It's 5:45. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Some of you getting in touch about early voting. Apparently there's a few of you dashing out to vote. This listener says, have voted, could not wait, just want this election over. Someone else says, early voted today, so easy and convenient. No one in the queue, over and done within 2 minutes. That's from Mel. Another person says, I voted last Saturday in Otarahanga, saw the polling station open, dropped in and was back out within minutes. And Andy says, yep, voted today, #1, painless and rewarding. Here's the thing though, what about the excitement of going actually on election day? And does that mean we should get rid of the law that says you can't campaign on polling day because you're all voting early? You're seeing the campaigning in the news. So is that law outdated now? Let me know. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. New Zealanders could be lounging on a Rarotongan beach this summer as the push for a travel bubble with the Cook Islands progresses. The newly appointed Cook's Prime Minister, Mark Brown, says formal arrangements have been made. The key barrier seems to be each country keeping community transmission free for 4 weeks. As Jonathan Mitchell reports, it could be a Cook Islands Christmas for some Kiwis.
Andrew Whitaker is the Chief Executive of Island Hotels in Rarotonga and has a couple of beachfront resorts ready and waiting for Kiwi travellers.
Our locals have looked after us as much as they possibly can, but it's very important now that we see some international visitors coming back. The island's looking beautiful, and we're quite excited about the prospect, but we'll wait and see until we get some real news to make sure that it's all confirmed.
Talks towards creating an Auckland to Rarotonga travel bubble were well advanced in July, with officials from New Zealand's Ministry of Foreign Affairs due to travel to the Cook Islands to make final checks. But the breaks went on swiftly after a COVID-19 cluster emerged in Auckland. Mark Brown was sworn in as the new Prime Minister of the Cooks last week and is keen to get things back on track. He's already been on the phone with New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern to thrash out some of the travel bubble plans. Mr Brown is optimistic, saying there are still a few technical points to iron out and officials have to assess various protocols. But Ms Ardern says a travel bubble hinges on no community transmission for 28 days.
28 days, but also making sure that we've got that clear separation for passengers. So the Cook Islands will want to come and check that those arrangements are in place. Likewise, we'll be checking on the other side things like the maritime border. Once that's all in place, then yes, I would expect we'll be in a position to open.
And that's music to the ears of New Zealanders who are itching to get on a plane. The president of the Travel Agents Association, Brent Thomas, says there is pent-up demand for overseas travel.
There's only a relatively small number of places people can stay at, so from that perspective it is going to be limited. But we do know that there are New Zealanders who are definitely keen to head over to the Cook Islands, and we expect that demand to be significant if that bubble was to eventuate soon.
However, the bubble has burst for Queenstown Mayor Jim Bolt. He thinks it would be a disaster.
I would much rather travel bubbles in Australasia and the islands be considered as one bubble applying to the islands, Australia and New Zealand. That would give us the ability to get Australians coming here to replace the domestic market, which will inevitably go to the islands. Without that, I think it would be something of a disaster for the New Zealand tourism industry.
Last week, Australia announced a one-way travel bubble across the Tasman. New Zealanders will be able to visit New South Wales and the Northern Territory without quarantining from October the 16th. But the same will not apply here. Anyone arriving in New Zealand must still complete 2 weeks of managed isolation. Things are looking more optimistic for the Pacific, with no community transmission in Aotearoa for 11 days. The hopes of a Cook Islands travel bubble in time for the Christmas holidays remains alive and well. For Checkpoint, called Jonathan Mitchell, Ohau.
But it's bad news for those dreaming of sipping an aperitif sitting by the Seine. All bars and cafes in the French capital Paris must close from tomorrow after a surge in coronavirus cases. The city and its regions are now at the highest alert level, as the BBC's Hugh Schofield reports.
The news from Paris is not good. COVID infections are up, above 250 per 100,000 people, which means the city's hit a higher alert level, and automatically new measures are going to kick in.
Sont des mesures de freinage, parce que l'épidémie va trop vite.
The measures are meant to put the brakes on. The epidemic is going too fast. We have to slow it down so that our health system is not overwhelmed.
The headline news is that bars and cafes are going to shut completely for 2 weeks from tomorrow. They were already having to close doors at 10 o'clock, but that hasn't been enough to stop the virus spreading.
Why are the authorities targeting bars and other drinking places? Well, the main vector for COVID, it's reckoned now, is young people. Young people gathering, young people intermingling, and young people, often under the effects of alcohol, dropping their COVID guard.
There's some respite for the hard-hit hospitality trade. Restaurants and bistros, which also expected to be told to shut, can stay open if they observe new rules. Maximum 6 to a table and masks on all the time except at the moment of eating. Young people are also targeted at Paris universities, which have been told that lecture halls must now only be used at 50% capacity. Parisians are sceptical about the bar closures, but resigned.
I'm not, surprised that my average age is the most contaminated. I think just people are still living like nothing is happening, you know? That's why I don't think that closing the bars is going to make a difference.
Paris now joins Marseille at what they call in France a state of maximum COVID alert. If things deteriorate further, the next level is a state of health emergency.
Hugh Schofield reporting from Paris. COVID has claimed a key fixture of the New Zealand Summer of Sport. The 2021 ASB Tennis Classic, due to be played in Auckland in January, has been cancelled due to the complexities of running a tournament amid the global pandemic. Tournament director Carl Budge told sports reporter Brenton Van Nistelrooy it's an incredibly sad day.
We thought we had a plan that was robust, but unfortunately there was just not a pathway to a decision that we could have in the timeframes we needed, and unfortunately that's led to the pretty tough environment we're in today.
So what had the government promised you or said was likely to be able to happen to bring tennis players into the country?
Mate, it's an incredibly complex situation. There's no sort of one-off area that we met or didn't meet. It's there's a myriad of factors that we needed to work through, and unfortunately there just wasn't a pathway for us to be able to get to a point that any of us could have confidence that we could deliver what you need to deliver a tournament of our standing in a time frame that would enable us to do it.
So there was enough support from the government? Had the communication been, I suppose, sufficient?
Yeah, we've had support from a number of stakeholders throughout this process. And, unfortunately, despite a lot of good effort, we've just not been able to get to a position that we can get the decision we needed. And unfortunately, whether we like it or not, we have to cop it on the chin and move on.
So there's no way that things could change over the next month or two where the event could still happen in 2021?
No, unfortunately not. To put on an event of the size that the ASB Classic is, we need a runway to bring that event together, and unfortunately, that's going to result in the ASB Classic being a casualty of COVID.
What does it mean for 2022 and beyond? Does this damage prospects for future tournaments?
It means we're going to be bloody steely in our determination to go and take the ASB Classic to new levels. We've been here for 60 years, and
no virus is going to stop the ASB Classic becoming the annual showpiece that I guess it's become and what we've known it for a number of years.
Yeah, it's going to be so strange for an Auckland summer to not have the ASB Classic in 2021. What are you going to be doing with a couple of weeks to spare in January?
Probably plotting. The mind won't sit at ease for too long. We've got to make sure that we come back stronger, and we've had incredible support from our sponsors. The team that we've got here that work tirelessly on trying to make a summer of tennis happen, and I think we owe it to them to do everything we possibly can to ensure that we return in 2022 and we return with a real statement.
ASB Classic Tournament Director Carl Budge talking to sports reporter Brenton Van Nistelrooy there. How do you get more trees in your country? It's a question governments across the world are trying to address as they attempt to reverse decades in which forestry cover has declined because of logging or other environmental damage. One approach, rewilding, has been tried in many countries where you give trees and wildlife the space they need to develop unhindered. But does it actually work? The BBC's Paul Moss reports from a farm in England.
We didn't have to walk far to find what the farmer was looking for. Amidst a hodgepodge of wild grasses, thistles and ragwort, Dominic Buskell showed me two small plants he was clearly rather pleased with.
We're looking at a pair of oak saplings.
This tiny shoot is one day going to be an oak tree.
Yeah, it's got little boughs already starting to grow out from the main, what will be a trunk. It's got a long time to go, oaks grow for hundreds of years, and this will be 2030 before you recognise it as a tree.
Dominic Buskell's pride is all the more striking because he didn't plant these trees, quite the opposite. In this corner of Ken Hill Farm, Dominic has stopped cultivating altogether and instead allowed nature to take over.
So my family have been farming here for over 100 years, and a year ago now we decided to stop farming this field and a few others like it, and since then it's been, managing itself. It's undergoing a process we call rewilding.
It's an idea that's catching on across the world, encouraging trees, plants and wildlife, but without so much active intervention. It may be some initial process needs to be triggered, but then the emphasis is on standing back and leaving alone. The approach has been used in Brazil's Amazon rainforest, and there are rewilding projects in Kenya and in Southeast Asia, which are trying to encourage conditions that will protect local birds. Another project in the US state of Colorado has the same goal for mammals. Alistair Driver is director of the campaign group Rewilding Britain. Trees, he argues, are a good example of how natural regeneration produces more sustained environmental gain.
The benefits are that it delivers it in the way that nature demands, and so you tend to get the right kinds of trees in the right places with the right soil conditions that lead to much more resilient tree growth of the right variety of species. They're totally localised provenance.
Is there a danger of ending up just sort of revering nature for its own sake and being anti-science, assuming that what nature does naturally is by definition better, wherein actually modern science could perhaps choose the best trees for that area?
It is possible for science to work out what sorts of trees would be suitable for what sorts of soil conditions, but you would have to do that thousands of times over because it varies from one corner of a field to another. What rewilding does is allow nature to determine what appears where.
And that was Alistair Driver ending that report by the BBC's Paul Moss there. Some of your feedback before 6 o'clock on early voting. A lot of you are really keen on it and have done it. This person says voted on Saturday in Dannyverk there at opening time with 50 others all keen to get it over with. That seems to be the general tone. Maureen says voted today at the mall in Rotorua, was quiet so could do it immediately. Another person though says voting early is like opening your Christmas presents before Christmas. Now Bob's got in touch from Gisborne. Hi Bob, my hometown. Bob says election day falls on the AMP show in Gisborne, and I think we may have lots of early voters in our town. Now that takes me back, Bob, to the hurricane and the octopus rides that didn't always end well for me. Louise says no electioneering on polling day. A line in the sand needs to be drawn. Also, how would we get rid of all those bloody hoardings if they weren't required by law to take them down before election day? I don't know about your neighbourhood, Louise, but someone's been out with an axe or some chopping implement. They're looking pretty pretty bad at the moment. And on Ohau and Hebe the dog, who was taken out because she needed a toilet break in the middle of the night. She's an old dog, and her owner spotted the fire there at Ohau and raised the alarm. Tom says they need to make a bronze of that dog that needed a toilet break.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata tēnei. The Immigration Minister is adamant the government won't let in workers from overseas to help with a horticulture labour shortage. Usually 14,000 RSE workers come into the country to work the apple season, but there are only about 6,000 who have stayed on since last season, and not all of them want to remain in New Zealand. Speaking in Hastings today after meeting local growers, Chris Farfoy says ideas like getting workers direct from COVID-free countries or isolating outside managed facilities are too risky.
We've heard those messages, and we've been making sure that we're sending the message back to them to make quite clear that at this stage that is not an option.
Chris Farfoy says the government is working on solutions such as extending working holiday visas and finding students to fill the gaps. Lake Ohau residents have returned to the fire-ravaged village this afternoon to recover essential items. Incident Controller Rob Hand says fire crews helped residents who needed medication and extra clothes. Meanwhile, a team of investigators has started looking into the fire's cause, area of origin and spread. Fire and Emergency say that because of the fire's complexity, it will be some time before the investigation will be complete. Up to 100 science jobs could be axed at Massey University. Science staff have been sent to 2 cost-cutting options, both of which could result in a third of the staff losing their jobs and specialist courses being dropped. Earlier this year, management also suggested dropping the science degree from its Albany campus in Auckland. A tertiary education union organiser, Heather Warren, says the latest proposal threatens access to good quality science education.
Applying low and no enrolment policies in a blanket form to a curriculum to decide which ones are worthy to continue because they bring in student funding and which ones are not, lacks a level of nuance as to what society actually needs from its tertiary education system.
Heather Warren of the Tertiary Education Union. Fire and Emergency says the 24-hour-long shift some firefighters worked during the Sky City Convention Centre fire last year will not happen again. An external review of Fire and Emergency's response praises how firefighters rose to the challenge and concludes they could not have prevented the damage done to the building. But it raises concerns about long shifts, leaving some on aerial machinery too tired to operate safely. National Commander Kerry Gregory acknowledges that.
Firefighters, they can often live on station for the 24 hours, and their shifts are managed around driving hours and that sort of thing, but they shouldn't be on any incident ground for that period of time, and definitely shouldn't be operating specialist appliances such as aerials.
Kerry Gregory of Fire and Emergency. National's Auckland spokesperson Denise Lee says she unreservedly supports the party's leader Judith Collins. The Maunga Kia MP says a leaked email in which she criticised Ms Collins was intended for internal purposes only. In the email given to News Hub, Ms Lee said that in bypassing her to announce plans to review the Auckland Council, Ms Collins displayed incredibly poor form. Ms Collins says the campaign team had been working on the announcement for several weeks. In a statement this afternoon, Ms Lee now says she accepts the leadership's decision about it. Auckland's courts will move back to just about normal from Thursday once Level 1 has kicked in. However, Perspex screens will remain in the jury boxes as an additional precaution. Under higher alert levels, members of the public needed a judge's permission to attend, but that will no longer apply. Physical distancing and mask wearing are still encouraged, but won't be mandatory. Traffic is currently at a standstill on State Highway 1 between Porirua and Paikakariki because of a crash this afternoon, and motorists are being urged to delay using the road. It's 4 minutes past 6. All Blacks coach Ian Foster has already settled on his starting 15 for Sunday's first Bledisloe Cup test against the Wallabies in Wellington. While surprises are unlikely, the biggest talking points will be whether Blues number 8 Hoskins Sotutu gets a debut, who starts in the back 3 and who'll be at first 5, Richie Mo'unga or Bowden Barrett.
Probably spend less time focusing on the 15 than what people think. Like you're focusing on your squad, and it's about getting a squad of 35 all on the same page, so that everyone's really clear about the role, so that when they do come in, it's seamless.
Ian Foster will name his first test side on Friday. The organisers of the 2021 ASB Classic tennis tournament have reluctantly cancelled it because of the complexities of running it during the COVID-19 pandemic. Tournament director Carl Budge says they've had to make the call now, 3 months out.
To put on an event of the size that the ASB Classic is, we need a runway to bring that event together, and unfortunately, that's going to result in the ASB Classic being a casualty of COVID.
ASB Classic director Carl Budge. The much talked about fight between New Zealand heavyweight boxers Joseph Parker and Junior Farr has finally been confirmed for December the 11th in Auckland. Parker is a former WBO World Heavyweight Champion, while Farr is the current WBO Oriental Interim Heavyweight title holder. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, our window on the world explores America's struggle with white gang violence. An election 2020 debate on Pacifica issues with candidates from National, Labour and the Greens, hosted by First Up's Indira Stewart. And two-time Grammy award-winning jazz and gospel artist Gregory Porter talks Grammys, gospel roots and musical genocide with Trevor Recchi for Worlds of Music. That's on Nights with me, Melody Thomas, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Waikato, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Fine today, brief showers tomorrow afternoon or evening. Waitomo to Wellington, including central high country, also Wairarapa and Nelson. Gale or severe gale nor'westerlies in exposed parts of Wellington and Wairarapa today. Some rain overnight or tomorrow morning. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay fine and warm today. Showers for a time tomorrow. Marlborough and Canterbury, a few showers spreading north today and clearing overnight. Rain developing tomorrow afternoon or evening with snow above 600 metres. Bulla and Westland rain with a few heavy falls, clearing Westland and Bulla today, showers tomorrow. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, showers near the coast today, rain or showers in most places tomorrow. And Chatham Islands, a few showers developing tonight, rain tomorrow night. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The people that first raised the alarm and the firefighters that raced to their rescue have opened up about how the Lake Ohau fire took hold. About 40 houses in the small community were destroyed or badly damaged, with some residents allowed through fire cordons to collect belongings today. The fire comes a month after a blaze at nearby Lake Pukake, and firefighters say the region's not out of the woods yet, as the fire season gets away. Our cameraman Simon Rogers and reporter Tess Brunton are in Twizel.
Lake Ohau resident Viv Smith-Campbell was the first to call 111 as her husband Louis drove around the village tooting his horn to wake everyone up.
He asked me to describe how big the fire was. He said, is it a football field? And I said, well, yeah, it is. And then I said, it's actually 2 football fields now. And then I said, no, it's 3 football fields. And I think I got up to 4. And I said, this is really serious.
Firefighters were on their way, but she knew people needed to get out now. Volunteer firefighter Carrie Jackson's tanker crew were the first on the scene. She describes driving towards Lake Ohau village as a firestorm, with flames reaching up to 15 metres into the sky. She sent the second alert to call for more backup.
As we headed up Lake Ohau Road, we started to have ash fall on the truck, so we knew that it was definitely growing in size quite quickly. Big chunks of ash means that it's quite like a fast burn coming through.
The fire was flashing across the road as they drove, which looks like explosions. It was difficult seeing the community she knew so well burning.
You did feel a little bit helpless in that sense too, in the fact of for the first hour we were just unable to enter the village. It was too unsafe. And it was quite, you do feel like, what am I doing? What more can we do?
Twizel's Chief Fire Officer, Simon Fox, lives in a rural area near the town. He received a page alerting him to a vegetation fire at Lake Ohau.
And I quickly looked out my window and seen a massive large glow of red over the hills behind me, and my first thoughts were, I need to get moving. So I headed straight towards this fire brigade here, knowing that my crews would already be on the road.
As he rushed to the scene, car after car passed him, heading in the opposite direction. They were residents fleeing the flames. Mr. Fox says in his 21 years at the brigade, he has never seen embers flying around like they did that morning. He says deciding whether to send firefighters into the village weighed heavily on him. Twisel's Deputy Chief Fire Officer, Ian Gardner, normally goes past Lake Ohau village on his way skiing, but his trip on Sunday was a lot different. Staying safe was the only thing racing through his mind.
But still, there was some hairy moments getting in there. The fire was right on the side of the road. And lots of smoke, very hard to see. Like I was saying earlier, you could only see one white line ahead of you. In plants, we had to slow down that fast. You could, one at a time, we were following that road.
By the time he arrived, fire engines were already there.
So we didn't actually make it up into the village until later on in the afternoon, actually. So, yeah.
But I mean, it's still...
But still, yeah, it was... The trees were on fire. It was just incredible. I think Simon said earlier, it was like apocalyptic scenes.
On Sunday, Hamish Smith's property was in the firing line as wind swept the blaze towards Quailburn Road, with 11 helicopters fighting to prevent the spread. He was relieved when the wind changed direction, easing the pressure.
In this community, in the Merrimack community, in the Mackenzie Basin, there's dryland parks all around the farming communities. So there's no reason why it can't start somewhere else if it wanted to.
He wants more collaboration to reduce the risk of similar blazes.
I hope that we can all work together towards a positive outcome regarding the risk of these dryland parks. I mean, there's risk with all high country farming in this environment. It is a brittle environment. But the difference between the graze country and the dryland parks is that the fuel isn't as great.
Fire and Emergency Incident Controller Rob Hand says it's concerning to see another large fire in the region so soon after the Pukaki Downs blaze.
You can blame a number of aspects of that, but climate change, the different weather. But in our fire environment we have fuel topography and the weather in regard to high temperatures and low relative humidity makes the fuel available. And we only need the smallest spark from whatever heat source to get that moving. And then it's just depending on how much fuel it's got to go and what else is in its ways.
But Mr. Hand says it hasn't been unmanageable.
The 1st of October was the old trigger for the fire season, but we can have burns going actively in the winter as well. So it is a concern, but we're managing so far.
Up to 12 residents will be allowed to return to the fire-ravaged village and gather their belongings each day. In Twisel for Checkpoint, Cortes Brunton, Tane.
Former Gloriavale members are picketing tonight's leaders' debate in Christchurch in the hope of forcing the Prime Minister to launch an inquiry into the secretive religious sect on the South Island's west coast. They're growing frustrated by what they believe is a lack of action from any government agency in response to claims by former residents of abuse, exploitation, poor education and health services. Shortly we'll hear from Hannah Harrison, who left Gloriavale 5 years ago and is among the protesters outside the James Hay Theatre. But first, here's Sally Murphy's report.
Gloriavale leavers are taking their frustrations to the Labour and National Party leaders tonight, having launched a petition calling for the government to take action. Following complaints from the inside about working conditions, the Labour Inspectorate visited the community, but last week said it couldn't take action as those in Gloriavale are deemed volunteers, so don't fit under the Employment Relations Act. And a month ago, Charity Services decided not to do a second investigation into Gloriavale after leavers raised concerns. But Gloriavale Leavers Support Trust spokeswoman Liz Gregory says they're not giving up.
Incredibly frustrating because there's enough information and evidence there to show that there is something desperately wrong. And the fact that they go in and have a little cursory look and talk to a few people and then come away and say, oh, nothing to see here, actually gives Gloriavale the power it wants, which is we can control the narrative. We tell people what to say, they will say it, and we win.
Ms Gregory says the government needs to learn from previous investigations.
They would have to sit around with leavers prior to even embarking on an investigation, find out the best ways of getting information. You don't just turn up to Gloriavale, set up your table and invite people to come and talk to you. You don't even just wander around the workplace and ask people. Everyone is looking at each other, everyone is informing on each other.
David Reddy left the community in 2017 due to the abuse within the community. He believes someone needs to take responsibility.
Gloriavale's got to pay for its sins. They've destroyed lives, they've destroyed families, they've harassed, bullied, and they need to pay for it. And they're going to think this whole thing, they're being persecuted for their faith. They're not. No one gives a damn about what they believe. The problem is how they're treating people.
Mr Reddy is separated from family members who remain inside the community, including his mother. He says there will always be people who want to live in an arrangement like Gloriavale, but an inquiry is needed to make change so people can have a better quality of life.
They would love it even more if it was done correctly, if it was done without abuse, without bullying, without harassment. Wouldn't that make your system better?
There are currently matters before the courts in relation to a member being charged with indecent acts. Meanwhile, Workplace Relations Minister Andrew Little says WorkSafe continues to proactively assess how Gloriavale is managing its health and safety obligations. But the former members protesting outside tonight's leaders' debate in Christchurch hope the next government will take their concerns seriously. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Sally Murphy.
And joining us from the protest outside the press debate in Christchurch is former Gloriavale resident Hannah Harrison. Thanks for being with us tonight, Hannah. Can you tell me what exactly you want to happen?
I think that most of us that have left Gloriavale have gotten to a point where we just really want there to be an independent inquiry into Gloriavale, into the way people are employed, into the physical, mental, social and emotional abuse that goes on there consistently. You're basically a slave within the community, and it's got to the point that so many of us have spoken out once we've left, but nothing changes and nothing happens. And I think we're really here tonight to stand up and say, look, something needs to happen. It's not good enough that every agency is saying, oh, that's not our problem. It's someone's problem. These people are citizens within our country. And for a lot of us, they're our family, and they're being treated like slaves.
Hannah, you mentioned some of the government agencies there. Obviously, the police have been into Gloriavale, and so is Oranga Tamariki. What's going wrong there, then? If they're going in there and looking, where's the breakdown?
The breakdown is they don't actually believe that they're being manipulated. From as long as I can remember as a child, when WorkSafe came in, when the police came in, when anyone came in, they would put their best face forward. They would say, oh, kids, you don't have to come to work today, or hide out in that back room until after the inspectors have come through. And every time the police talk to someone, it's who the leaders want them to talk to. Every time TV talks to someone, it's who the leaders want them to talk to. So really, the police, Oranga Tamariki, WorkSafe, they're only seeing what the leaders want them to see.
What did you do when you were in there? You spent the first 20 years of your life there. So when it came to working, what age were you when you started working, and what was expected of you?
So at the age of 15, I went into a transition education program, which meant I would be at work for most of the day and then school in the afternoon, probably one of the hardest years of my life. So you don't get to choose what kind of work you do. Apparently they're self-employed or volunteers. They don't get to choose their hours. They don't get to choose the job they do. They don't have any say at all with their work as to what they do. And you're working gruelling hours, sometimes from 4 in the morning till 8 at night, with maybe one break in between. That's about 10 minutes.
So do you think that's slavery?
Absolutely. I think it comes into the category of you're forced to work without pay and without reward for your work, which is then slavery.
So when authorities or anyone from the government or agencies came into Gloriavale, what were you told to say or do?
So I remember as a young, maybe 12 or 13-year-old, working in the moss shed at one point, and we were told there was going to be inspectors there that afternoon, and so at 2 o'clock we would leave and we would go away for half an hour while the inspectors were there, because it was illegal to have underage people working in there, and then we would come back after they left. So that's common practice at Gloriavale, and I'm sure that anyone that's left would say exactly the same thing. And as far as talking to anyone goes, nobody actually interviews you unless you're the ones that the leaders have chosen are going to speak. And the leaders choose you to speak because they know you'll say exactly what they want you to say.
Did you have the same education as young men in there? Did you sit school exams?
Yes, so you do sit school exams. No, you have a different education. Their education is very gender-based. So girls, like, as a kid, I wanted to do woodwork, and I wasn't allowed to because that was a boys' thing to do. We don't have girls doing things like that. So it's a very gender-based education with, like, even up in the senior years, there's actually no choice on what sort of thing you get to study in school, and you don't get to choose if you can go to uni or not. They choose if they think you need to go to uni. That's it. There's absolutely no choice in any area of your life.
Hannah, some people would say this is part of the religious beliefs of those people who choose to live at Gloriavale. They're exercising their religious freedoms and rights, and minors who are in there are under their parents' guidance, and that is the life that parents choose for them. What do you say to that?
I think that's a really misinformed approach. For the last 50 years, everyone that is in there was born in there. Their parents were born in there. So for those minors, their parents choosing means nothing because those parents have never had the choice in the first place. And I think as far as religious freedom goes, that is not religious freedom. That's not what religious freedom's about. That's religious slavery. That's a bunch of 16 men holding 500 other people up to their standard, and they decide whether they're going to heaven or hell. That is not religious freedom.
Hannah, you're there tonight protesting in the hope that Jacinda Ardern gets your message. So right now, if you could speak to her, what's your message directly to her?
My message to Jacinda would be to open your eyes. Sometimes you only see what you want to see. There is people suffering in there. There is people without the lack of medical care that they need. There is people working far too long. There is so much wrong with that place. It is so despicable to me to think that you wouldn't think it needed an investigation and inquiries into what is going on in there. I suppose the thing that I could say is be kind. These are vulnerable people that need your help. And that's why we're here, to really show that these people are voiceless, and we're here to be a voice for those voiceless people.
Hannah, I can hear it in your voice that this really hurts you. Is that
Yes, yeah, definitely. I have a lot of family in there still. Both sets of my grandparents are in there. They're both all my grandparents are over 65. They're still working full time. I'm not convinced that they're getting the medical care they need in there. In fact, I know they're not. And the worst thing is the fear that holds every single person in there in slavery. The fear of going to hell, the fear of leaving, the fear of the outside world. That is how the leaders control them. They control them by that fear. And I feel like if we could give them the social freedoms that the rest of us enjoy and take for granted, then their eyes would be open, and they would see that there's so much more to life than what's in those walls of Gloriavale.
Hannah, if you could speak to your grandparents, what do you want to say to them?
I love you. I miss you. no matter where I go, I'm still going to love you, even if you don't agree with the choices I've made. I believe they were the right choices. Open your eyes, look around you, look at the fruit of what that place is. Yeah.
Hannah, thank you very much for sharing your story with us this evening. That is Hannah Harrison, who is with other protesters outside the press debate in Christchurch this evening, hoping to convince Jacinda Ardern to agree to an inquiry into Gloriavale. It is 25 minutes past 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's nearly a year since Auckland's Convention Centre became the scene of a Herculean operation involving 150 firefighters. An intense fire burned for 3 days, bringing the city centre shuddering to a standstill and gutting the under-construction centre. Now, Australian counterparts in an operational review conclude firefighters could not have prevented the extensive loss and damage, but recommended a raft of changes to fire and emergency operations. Katie Todd reports.
The blaze began when the flame of a worker's blowtorch accidentally snagged the inner cardboard tubing in a roll of roofing membrane. Strong winds fanned the flames in the roof.
More than 20 fire trucks rushed from all over the city and some as far as Hamilton.
Flames and black smoke are still billowing out from the roof of the convention centre.
8 million litres of possibly contaminated water has flooded the basement car park.
Now those moments have been revisited in a report assessing fire and emergencies response. Australia's Fire and Emergency Council says the blaze was on a scale rarely experienced in this country and praises how firefighters rose to the challenge. Fire and Emergency National Commander Kerry Gregory is also proud of that, though he's aware there's room for improvement in the way the organisation prepares for large-scale events.
We commissioned the report because we want to learn from these type of incidents, and it was a really highly challenging incident that was obviously quite complex. But what I really was pleased about is that it really felt that our people drew on their expert knowledge around firefighting in those urban environments and really managed the incident safely. But there was a couple of key points that I took out of it. It had areas where we need to reinforce some of our training.
The report notes people were placed in command centres without the specific training they needed and suggests a larger command centre should have been set up off-site. It raises concerns about 24-hour shifts worked by some firefighters, including aerial operators who worked on snorkels until they could no longer operate safely. Greyland Station Officer Martin Campbell, who's the Auckland local secretary of the Professional Firefighters Union, agrees rostering was a problem.
We had the commanders doing 6-hour rotations and firefighters doing either a 10-hour or a 14-hour rotation. And it created a little bit of confusion as to sometimes there'd be multiple commanders would be in charge of the firefighters during their shifts. So that would create some confusion as to who firefighters were actually reporting to sometimes. And it'd also be a little bit of animosity there because the firefighters could see that the commanders were being rotated every 6 hours and being refreshed every 6 hours.
The report makes 11 recommendations, suggesting fire and emergency reviews how it manages high-risk buildings and sets up command units. It recommends training more aerial firefighters and ensuring incident controllers have adequate training. Fire and Emergency accepts the recommendations, and Kerry Gregory says it's set up a working group to implement them. He says 9 more people have been trained in aerial firefighting, and the 24-hour shifts won't happen again.
There's a lot of different things that are either partially in train or we've started work around them, including what gaps there are in our training to address.
In a statement, the general manager of the company building the convention centre, Fletcher Construction, welcomed the findings and expressed gratitude for sustained efforts to fight the fire. Gary Walker says the construction industry is determined to learn from the fire and this review will help. For Checkpoint, Katie Todd, TNA.
Well, a few minutes ago, we spoke to Hannah Harrison, who was a former resident of Gloriavale. She's 25 years old now. She left when she was 20. She's been out for 5 years. And she's with a group of protesters who are outside the leaders' debate in Christchurch. They are hoping to convince Jacinda Ardern to have an independent inquiry into the religious sect, which is on the west coast of the South Island. A lot of you, the feedback is pouring in regards to Hannah. Jim says Gloriavale is a disgrace and should should be shut down. They are not living by the teachings of Christ. Someone else has got in touch to say on Hannah, the 25-year-old former Gloriavale resident, what an amazing speaker. And Hannah there gave a message to her grandparents who are still inside Gloriavale. She left with some of her family members there, and a direct appeal to Jacinda Ardern. Keith has got in touch to say, having heard this, the interview with Hannah, ex-Mormon Jacinda's vote now hinges on her response to this. Or I'm all green, says Keith. That interview will be on our Facebook page.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Immigration Minister says it's too risky to let in workers from overseas to help with a horticulture labour shortage. Lake Ohau residents have returned to recover essential items as crews continue to fight the village's devastating fire. Up to 100 science staff could lose their jobs at Massey University. Fire and Emergency says firefighters will never again work 24-hour-long shifts after a review of the Sky City Convention Centre blaze. And Māori political candidates will come together to have a cross-party debate in Te Reo Māori tonight. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
If we look at forest fire records, this is the worst in New Zealand's history.
Live with local, national and international stories as they happen.